Break a leg is right. The Addiction Recovery Channel is brought to you by Kinney Drugs.
Purdue Funds.
Kinney Drugs. And by Magic Hat Brewery.
Right, with CBD and
Guys,
With CBD in their beer.
we're going to start on camera 3. I'll give you the 5, 4, and then 3, 2, 1 will be silent, okay? Yeah, you're going to start right over there. Whichever one has the red light on, that's where we're filming at any given point in time. Okay? Kevin, you good?
Okay, good.
All right, here we go, guys.
God bless us all.
In 5, 4.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ed Baker. Welcome to the Addiction Recovery Channel, otherwise known as ARC. ARC is a channel, a public TV channel that is devoted to providing information, accurate, current information to the general public, focused on this brain disease that we call addiction or substance use disorder. The idea is that if the general public has accurate information, their response will be a groundswell, and we see it today, a literal groundswell of compassion and inclusion for this particular population in Vermont, people suffering from substance use disorder. The ultimate goal is actually to save lives. So thank you, Jalinda, for your introduction. Today's focus, the focus of today's program, will be recovery strategies and recovery supports. And to that end, it's my pleasure to welcome Peter Espenshade, the Chief Executive Officer at the Vermont Alliance for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery.
Great to be here. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you for being on the show,
Really
Peter.
enjoy this work.
Peter brings a distinguished history of academic and public service contributions. His first job in Vermont was as the executive director for the Lake Champlain Fund.
Land Trust, yes.
Lake Champlain Land Trust. Second job was as the vice president
At the Vermont Community Foundation.
at the Vermont
Yes.
Community Foundation. He's presently held his current position at VAMHAR since 2013. So, Peter, I guess the subject of today's show is recovery supports and recovery strategies, as outlined by Governor Scott's council on the opioid epidemic. So my first question to you is, you know, we hear this word recovery quite often, but what does it mean? What is it? What's the definition of it?
Yeah, I think that first off, I think you're right on. I think folks are really getting it culturally, what treatment is, what recovery is, how we can help folks heal from this health condition. So the way I like to look at it is there's kind of two phases to one's substance use disorder. There's the acute phase where one is really suffering and where one may go into treatment at a residential or an outpatient treatment center. And then what happens after that? What happens after that if we are to be successful culturally and as a public health concern is we need to support folks who are coming out of that acute phase, out of that treatment phase, and probably support them throughout their entire life. And that's recovery. Recovery is the long-term care, the love and supports that we give to individuals to stay clean and sober, to stay focused on their recovery. And it's really, it's one of my favorite parts of this work because it has the longest horizon and it's really the most heartfelt and the most positive. People recover. And more people are going to recover the more we understand and bolster recovery supports.
I understand that, and that's a beautiful description. Thank you, Peter. So just to build on that a little bit. So a person breaks their arm,
Yep.
and it's an acute medical incident. They go in for acute medical care.
Yep.
Their arm is set, maybe there's a cast, there's some pain medication, the cast is taken off after a few weeks, there's physical therapy, and then they go back to business as usual, and the episode is over.
Yep.
Not so with substance use disorder.
No, it's not. And that it's a great question because it brings up one of my favorite analogies. You know, all of us are trying to understand what is the opioid epidemic, what is addiction, what is substance use disorder. And the analogy, at least that I use in my own mind, is the analogy of type 2 diabetes. It's substance use disorder is far more of a chronic condition, the way type 2 diabetes is. So one may have an acute phase in their struggles with type 2 diabetes. They may be hospitalized, they may be in some form of shock. They get that immediate treatment, and then there is long-term maintenance of their health after that. And I think it's almost a direct analogy with substance use disorder. Is an individual has suffered from it, it can reach an acute phase. They then have the courage and the wherewithal and support to go into treatment. That's the analogy with the hospitalization with type 2 diabetes. And then, just like with somebody with type 2 diabetes, they're only going to be successful with long-term, healthy, health-based maintenance and support moving forward.
All
It's
right.
exactly the same thing.
All right. So there's recovery and health over the entire lifespan.
You bet. You
All
bet.
right. Like a person with diabetes would have to maybe take insulin shots, watch their diet, do certain exercises, go in for periodic checkups. A person with substance use disorder in recovery would have to do certain behaviors and have to watch out for certain behaviors and obtain certain supports maybe throughout the course of their life. So there would be no relapse, or if there were a relapse, it would be identified and dealt with immediately.
You bet. And it's bingo.
All right.
And the same thing with type 2 diabetes is it's, you know, individuals will have better days, better years. They may slip back, move forward. And, you know, that community is wonderful in supporting them. And we're lucky in Vermont because we have a very supportive recovery community.
Oh, yeah.
And
Sure.
by that, I don't only mean folks like me who happen to be an individual in recovery. I mean everybody, seemingly everyone that we run into throughout the state is cheering folks on.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And that's for that groundswell of compassion.
Yeah.
We literally saw it at the recovery walk
Yes.
in Burlington this summer, literally cheering people on. The general public was out there saying, yeah, go ahead, nice going, keep it up. And people in recovery were walking, there was no shame. There was all affirmation. It was beautiful.
It was really beautiful. And you know, I know that in the very, very early days of Burlington's recovery walk, there would be a small number of individuals in recovery, really courageous, right? Sort of the trailblazers of our field. And they weren't jeered necessarily, but nobody was cheering them on or patting them on the back.
Little suspicion there.
Yeah, it was a little like, right? Simply because folks didn't know, right? I like it, you know, maybe being optimistic about the potential for human nature. And
Yeah.
I think folks didn't know. It's like, I don't know what addiction is. It's a little weird. But folks are getting it. And you're right. When we walked down Church Street this year,
Yeah.
strangers, shoppers, visitors, tourists were applauding
Yeah.
folks in recovery, saying, good for you. And that, in many ways, is sort of a little metaphor for recovery support. So it's a community cheering us along.
It's true. Less stigma, more compassion, more inclusion, less discrimination.
Yep.
You know, and thank you and what you do at the Recovery Coaching Institute. You know, I'd like to ask you now about something called pathways to recovery. What is meant by pathways to recovery? Are there many ways that someone can enter into recovery, or is there just one set way that someone has to do? What are pathways to recovery?
Oh, great question, because I think it's really a parallel question to your earlier observation. Culturally, we in the United States and probably elsewhere, we only had one model of recovery. We only had one model that we knew worked and that we saw work with ourselves or our friends and our loved ones. And that model was what's called the 12-step approach. We're maybe familiar with that through Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. It's a great path to recovery based on the 12 steps. Started by 2 Vermonters, by the way, which was friggin' awesome. And we know that. And when I first got into recovery, I saw that my friends were using that as shorthand. They were saying, how's AA going? How are the 12 steps doing? Even though my path was something different. 12-step is an amazing path. It is the foundational path in recovery. What we've learned over the past, especially over the past 20 years, I would say, is that there are other paths that are equally effective, that are different. They may be complementary, they may be completely different, but all of these roads lead to the same summit, which is a healthy, supported lifestyle of recovery. And there's some really interesting paths that have been coming around lately and growing in popularity.
So in other words then, that if somebody has a unique path to recovery, that's as valid as the tried and true 12-step path. Someone comes into recovery through a church or through a relationship with a friend, or maybe spontaneously enters into like a path to recovery. This is as valued as what has historically been the tried and true path.
Absolutely. So some of those paths that we see in Vermont that are very popular are the Buddhist path. That is the fastest growing path in recovery.
Wow.
It's also known as refuge recovery. We've got some nice meetings throughout the state. There's a path called Smart Recovery, which is a simplified form of recovery that works really well. I mean, simplified in the good sense of that term. Of course, the number of 12-step paths. There are faith-based paths in the Christian church and in other faiths. There are medicated-assisted paths where individuals continue to take different medications to help their recovery moving forward. What's interesting is not only the fact that there are so many paths that lead to the same summit, but that many folks are on multiple paths. You know, sometimes an individual will go to some AA meetings and then go to a Buddhist meeting and then work with their psychiatrist and then meet with friends or participate in a sober softball league or live in a sober house. That, you know, there's not just one dogma.
Yeah.
Because people are complicated.
Yeah,
and,
that's beautiful.
And that's that kind of multiple supports that I think is really the nicest part of the whole
To
thing.
cast the widest net possible.
Why not?
Bring in as many people as possible.
You know, why not? There's not one true way. There are many ways.
And it's also not a perfect process, is it?
God, no.
Someone can go and there can be a recurrence of substance use or a lapse, maybe for a month or a year or however long, and they're welcome back to the path. That maybe that was part of their process. Maybe they had to learn that way. You know, they're welcome back to the path when they're ready to come back. And there's supports out there to try to pull them back into the recovery path, correct?
Absolutely. And I think that is, you know, the onus is on us and the recovery community. I think that's the next level of public awareness that we're charged with getting out there, is what we will call relapse or backsliding or taking a step back is often part of the process. And, you know, Mark Twain said, quitting smoking is the easiest thing in the world. I've done it hundreds of times, right?
Yeah.
And I think anybody who's tried to quit something, some sort of addiction, knows it's hard. But eventually, through support, it sticks.
And, you know, when you look at addiction as a brain disease, you realize the complexities of some of the impairments that actually occur in a person's brain, and they just don't disappear. Sometimes they lag on and hold on and reappear, and recovery, you know, takes an effort over time, and people are just not perfect. Sometimes they'll move backwards and move forwards. How many of us haven't taken 2 steps back and 3 steps forward and 1 step back and 2 steps forward? And that's what compassion really is all about, to not approach people with any kind of judgmental attitude. And I think that I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, about your recovery coach training, the Institute, and how your coaches really are taught to not be judgmental.
Yes.
But to see people, you know, with value and meet them where they are. Talk about that a little bit, Peter.
Great. So 1 second of background. We run the Recovery Coach Academy, which is a 40-hour training where we certify Vermont's recovery coaches. So what is a recovery coach? A recovery coach will focus on really 3 things. So the first, to answer your question, is recovery coaches believe in the principle that the opposite of addiction is connection.
Nice.
That the way folks, and there's some really good developing science around this. This is not just a nice thought. There is some good research being done around this. It's still a hypothesis, but there's a lot of truth to it. The opposite of addiction is connection. So by connecting folks back to society, no matter where they are on their path to recovery, not by excluding them or punishing them or intervening or cutting off them from their family, but re-engaging them. That act of human connection is one that really sparks long-term recovery.
So much more appealing and attractive.
And we used to have the model, as you know, not that long ago. And in the 90s, it was the dominant model, 80s and 90s, intervention. So if you're suffering from substance use disorder, I'm going to cut you off. I could be your brother, and I'm going to say, if you don't get clean, I'm cutting you off. I'm going to intervene in your life.
Tough love.
Yeah, well, it's BS. Whereas if we connect people, then we get those natural bonds, those naturally occurring opioids, that dopamine, that human healthy bonding for society and for the tribe and for family and partners that really works.
I couldn't agree with you more.
It's awesome stuff.
And I think one of the other principles of recovery coaching is meeting the person where they are.
Yep.
And not dictating a route, but more finding and helping the person to motivate to find their route, to find their path, and take activity in their path.
You bet. And that's I think that's the second big pillar as I talk about this is, we'll say meeting people where they are. We'll talk about honoring the individual, and what does that mean? It means what you're talking about. We are not, recovery coaches aren't there to preach a certain modality or a certain path to recovery. They're there to listen, to find out where an individual is out, and then to find the strengths that we can build on to keep them moving forward.
All right, so now that's clear. Now, say for instance, let me give you like an hypothesis, a situation. Say for instance, a person like actively involved in addiction, injecting drugs every day.
Yep.
Manages to find his or her way to a recovery center. And sits down then with a recovery coach.
Yep.
Would that recovery coach then try to do therapy with that person, or would they recognize the gravity of that person's situation and refer that person for medical attention with the understanding that they would then come back? What would the recovery coach's role be?
Really good question. The recovery coach does only 2 things, in essence, only 2. And we recovery coaches, we are not counselors, we're not psychiatrists, we're not social workers, we are recovery coaches. What does that mean? Number 1, it means we are extremely well trained and we practice motivational interviewing.
Okay.
What does that mean? It means deep listening. It means sitting with someone, not telling someone what to do, but just listening. We believe that listening is an act of love, and listening is a clinically proven act of healing, and that's what's called motivational interviewing. So if in your scenario an individual came in, I wouldn't prescribe and say, here's what you're doing and here's what you need to do. No. The way we heal is by listening. That's number 1. And it's deep listening that requires training. Number 2, the second thing we do is we offer resources in a way that's non-threatening to the individual. So if you came in that scenario, if I were doing my coaching job poorly, I would say, you're clearly using, you need to get into treatment. What's that going to do to you?
Right, probably make me feel a little bit nervous.
Are you going to ever come back?
I'm not so sure.
Probably not, right?
I'm not so sure.
But
Because mostly people are told what to do wherever they go.
right.
And they're told what to do mainly with like a punitive kind of a tone to it. And they don't respond well to that.
No. How often are we listened to in life? How often are we really listened to? And you know, at the Coaching Academy, one of our homework assignments is, you know, over the next night or week, feel what it feels like to be listened to, and feel how warm and human and connected that is. That's why we say, as a coach, stay in your lane and listen, and then provide resources in a really thoughtful way.
I'm really liking that. It's so good to have you explain this, because I know a lot of the people, the general public, myself included, don't really understand the depth and the work that's gone into developing this role. How many recovery coaches would you say we have in Vermont right now?
We've got about 100 coaches currently actively working and volunteering. The Vermont Recovery Coach Academy has trained a couple hundred folks, with folks coming from California, from
really?
Kentucky, from other states.
Wow! Wow! Congratulations!
And a lot from Vermont. Well, I think that you know, we were one of the first trainings. We certainly were not the first. We were founded on the great work of the Connecticut Recovery Coach Academy, but we were one of the first, and so other states would send their people to us, and now we're solely focused on Vermont and training Vermonters.
Yeah, we do seem to be, Vermont does seem to be leaders in this field.
Yep.
We have so many. We have the hub and spoke program, we have naloxone, we have recovery coaching. It's really something that this state here, we should really be proud of that. So where do you see your field going, the field of recovery coaching? Where do you think it's going? What's the immediate future of how this will roll out in Vermont?
Yeah, so I think we are at a good phase now, and I think we have a lot of work to do moving forward. So I think we've got the training really well defined. We've got a clear evidence-based training that's appropriate for this field, that keeps our coaches in their lane, doing good work, and there's no shortage of work to do
I hear you.
in that lane.
Yes, absolutely.
So now, as recovery coaching grows more and more popular, we'll need to think about, well, what does that mean? Do we ever want to have billing codes for Medicaid? What, right now we're certifying coaches. What does that mean? That means we're certifying that folks have completed the training and can abide by the basic rules of coaching. But we need to make sure we're getting continued education and recertifying folks and taking the next level in this professional health field to help it grow and stay really strong.
I mean, I can't, as a professional in the field, I was in private practice for over 30 years. I just can't tell you how encouraged I am by this. Because to me, we have a vulnerable population with brain disease that up until now has had inadequate supports to continue in health after they've achieved health from treatment.
Yep.
The recovery supports just weren't there. So you would have a population where a large percentage of them would complete treatment, come out of treatment, back to the community where there's cues and triggers and drugs available and lots of pressure to go back to that old way of life. And because of an absence of adequate supports, there was a high, what we would call, relapse rate.
Yep.
And we would lose a lot of people that way. Now you have these same folks maybe coming out of residential treatment or coming out of psychotherapy with community supports in place, recovery coaching in place, which what you're saying theoretically will be available throughout the lifespan. So you have this whole population of people that are getting better that potentially will stay better. And if they don't, will get better again and stay better then.
You bet.
And the other thing I see is that there's this encouragement to them to just give, to continue to give back
Yeah.
to the developing recovery community. Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just something. So many of our recovery coaches are what we call peers. And peer is a jargon for somebody who's in recovery themselves, who has the lived experience. And we've also got family members and allies out there. Peers want to give back because it's a way of sort of paying it forward. Somebody helped them, they want to help others. Family members can provide a real special empathy to other family members.
Oh, I would imagine.
What's it like?
I would imagine.
And we're getting a small but increasing number of allies, of folks who are just out in the community, who feel this, who see this every day, and say, what can I do to help? What can I do to sit down and listen and really care about what people are going through, and then to provide some resources that might be helpful to this person?
I feel so encouraged by you. You know, thank you so much, and thank you and your institute. You know, the Vermont Alliance for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery, and your Recovery Coaching Institute, for the many contributions you've made. And I know for a fact that a lot of your training is provided free of charge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So I encourage folks. We are adding trainings, given the nature of this public health issue. We're adding trainings, new trainings every week. Many of our trainings are selling out, but don't let that distract your viewers, because there'll always be new ones for folks to come to. What a great thing that we have a demand of people who want to get trained in how to help. What better problem could the state have?
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to say that there'll be a slide going up now showing your contact information. So people who want to get in touch with Peter or the Vermont Alliance for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery, feel free to do that. I wanted to give you a few seconds to address the population out there with substance use disorder. If there are people out there right now watching that have substance use disorder, Peter, what would be your message to them?
Is that I think two things. Number one, people recover. And so many of the individuals I work with who've suffered from this, somewhere in their heart, they know that they're thinking someday about recovering. And it's a real message of hope, is that people do recover. And then number two, you don't need to do it alone. There are so many caring, non-judgmental, talented, cool, appropriate people who are there whenever you're ready, to support your recovery, because we miss you. We miss you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Really enjoyed this.
And I just want to say to the viewers that the next segment of this show will have one of those people who care deeply about people approaching recovery and in recovery. Andrew Gagne from the Vermont Friends of Recovery will be on to talk a little bit about recovery housing. So don't go away. Thank you. That's it.